President Cyril Ramaphosa and the French President Emmanuel Macron. So the big things that have been announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, also emphasizing the issue about the TRIPS waiver. India has just mentioned that they don't foresee any barriers to what has been announced. What has been announced, of course, is that Africa's first COVID-19 vaccine facility using messenger RNA, a breakthrough technology in the production of vaccines against COVID-19, will be based here in South Africa. So let's unpack some of this. Professor Mosa Moshabela joins us now to talk a little bit more about this. I mean, quite a few things to go through, Professor. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So I'm quite intrigued by this. So India is saying that they don't foresee any barriers. South Africa itself saying that it has many partners that will help in the production of this. So let's perhaps first start with the messenger RNA technology. It's not new, but why is it important for us?
Greetings, Tsepiso, and to the viewers. I think that two aspects are really important about it. One is that it's being used to basically manufacture some of the more potent vaccines that we currently have for COVID-19. But also, it is a technology that is going to carry potential for other vaccines that we need to develop going forward. And so the capacity to be able to manufacture mRNA vaccines means that South Africa is not, and Africa as a whole, actually, we are not going to be left behind in the advancement of the technology around vaccine manufacturing. But I think that it's important to note that we don't have this capacity at all anywhere in Africa currently. We don't have the know-how, we don't have the skills of how to manufacture mRNA vaccines. We don't have the technological platform, the sort of instruments and facilities, infrastructure that is needed to manufacture mRNA vaccines. And so this is an important step forward.
I want to talk about BioVac, which I believe at the moment already produces a pediatric vaccine under license from France's Sanofi. So would you say that France's partnership is especially essential, given the fact that of the vaccination capacity that we have in Africa, I believe is 10 sites, that France is very much at the epicenter of that?
No, indeed. I think that France is making its position very clear in terms of building on the work that is already happening with BioVac, the partnership. And they are clearly going to possibly work towards a much larger share of the development of vaccines. It's a strategic move for them. I think, it's going to be really important for us to think about how this will relate to other forms of vaccines, because, the ones that we currently have, the platforms we have currently at BioVac are only a small fraction of the different platforms that are required in South Africa and in Africa to produce different types of vaccines. So for France to actually go specifically and support through WHO and through all the bilateral negotiations, the mRNA vaccine, it's making its position very clear. I think it's a good step forward because it's building on an existing partnership that carries the potential for success, especially because it's taken a long time for South Africa and France to get to the point where it is with Sanofi.
If we're talking about independence, ultimately, that Africa will be able to spearhead its own path in terms of innovation, science, investment and innovation, I want to look at France's role in the TRIPS negotiations. And it's said that the major things that are needed for a country to be able, 4 key ingredients in being able to be in charge of its own manufacturing, that would be financing. That's a very important one, including expansion of research capacity, regulatory bodies being up to international standards, but a commitment from governments. Are we able to extricate ourselves from France when we finally believe that we want to chart our own paths, the directions we want to take in what we want to manufacture?
No, I think that if we look in the short term, we are going to depend on a lot of other countries internationally and companies, actually, that have the expertise and to some extent that have the resources to support us getting started off. And it's not just going to be in South Africa, it's going to be in other African countries as well. However, if you then kind of look medium term to long term, so for example, the regulatory body in South Africa, SAPRA, is in the process of preparing to be upgraded in terms of accreditation by the World Health Organization. When that accreditation happens to the next level and they prepare for the next level after that of accreditation, we are going to gain more independence in terms of regulatory body, including the ability to evaluate the current good clinical manufacturing practices, the CGMP practices that are required for human vaccine manufacturing. And you go further in terms of the know-how, in terms of skills. We need to build a pipeline of people who can be trained. And then we are already strong in terms of R&D and clinical trials. We're not going to have a huge gap there to close, but we still also need to do that work. So the finances would be probably the one area where one will have to review at a later stage to see where we are at as a country and as a continent.
And I believe most of that is largely independent on international aid. But I want to look at what the WHO Director General said, that these partnerships will be largely dependent on medical efficacy, but also speaking about the willingness to share IP. Given the fact that Big Pharma has been reluctant to do that, how much faith are we going to put into this venture where we see Africa finally being able to produce its own vaccines for whatever it is?
Yeah, I think this is a very important point to make, that this is not a solution that is short term. It's not a solution that is going to solve our problem with the third wave. And it's not a solution that's going to solve our problems in 2021. And I think as it was said, we're looking at some progress sometime in 2022, but really you start to see the benefits of this kind of investments, in 2023, 2024 going forward. And this is really important to put into context. It's a promise of a future, but it's not necessarily an immediate solution, and particularly because of issues of intellectual property. There is definitely we are bound to have problems. Companies like countries like Germany, for example, have a lot more vested interest in terms of intellectual property because their companies were quite active in developing many of the aspects along the value chain of, say, for example, mRNA. And you hear of more than 100 patents along that whole pathway. And you know that there will be a problem in terms of intellectual property. And countries like that are not supporting the waiver. They think that there needs to be other mechanisms in order to deal with the issue of intellectual property rather than the waiver.
Just before I let you go, Professor Moshabela, President Ramaphosa is saying he's going to meet with his partners and he's going to say we want this to happen now. So how should we interpret now, and how will it help us in our bid to speed up access to vaccines, given the fact that we are in a very tight corner at the moment?
Yeah, now means that we get started with the work in terms of putting infrastructure in place, putting some training programs in place, identifying people, formalizing agreements and so forth. It's really not necessarily in terms of any products yet. But also I think that what would be really important is for BioVac and the related partners to provide to bring the public into confidence in terms of what is happening, what is being planned, and provide periodic progress so that there can be clear accountability. This is an important of national interest, and we need to know what is happening with it going forward.
And that's the one word we've heard throughout with regards to this vaccination, PPE, just the fight against COVID-19, transparency. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Professor Mosa Moshabela, who is Acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and Innovation at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So the right person to speak to on that announcement that the WHO, South Africa and France has announced that the first vaccine facility using messenger RNA will be developed here in South Africa, the site that is.